They had been drilled for years that the Americans were savages, weaklings propped up by machines and money, ready to crumble under the might of the Reich. But when German prisoners of war arrived at Camp Hearne in Texas in 1943, the enemy shattered their illusions not with bayonets or bombs, but with the simple act of abundance, watching farmers heap food onto their plates until tears blurred their hardened eyes. They had expected chains, starvation, and the cold sting of defeat, but instead they found fields stretching endless under the sun, barns bursting with grain, and meals that made them question everything they had fought for. The transport train rattled to a stop under the relentless Texas heat of 1943, its iron wheels screeching against the tracks like a final protest against the journey that had brought these men so far from the fatherland. Dozens of German soldiers, their uniforms stained with the mud of North Africa and the dust of Sicily, stepped down onto the dry, cracked earth, squinting against the glare of the southern sun. Their faces were gaunt, etched with the lines of exhaustion and the shadows of battles lost. Beards had grown wild during the weeks at sea, and their eyes held the hollow stare of men who had seen too much death, too much fire, too much of their comrades falling in the sand. Each one carried the weight of indoctrination deep in his bones, lessons hammered into them from the Hitler Youth through the Wehrmacht ranks. Surrender was cowardice, capture was disgrace, and the Americans, those mongrel capitalists, would treat them like dogs, stripping them of honor, dignity, and life itself. They had been warned in hushed tones around campfires and in the trenches that the Yanks were barbaric, driven by Jewish greed and Negro savagery, that they would torture prisoners for sport, feed them slop unfit for pigs, and work them until their bodies broke. Many had steeled themselves for the end, whispering prayers to their families or clutching hidden cyanide capsules, ready to choose death over the humiliation of living as a prisoner in enemy hands. But as the doors slid open and the hot wind whipped across their faces, what greeted them was not the crack of whips or the bark of vicious dogs. Instead, rows of wooden barracks shimmered in the heat haze, surrounded by barbed wire fences that glinted under the sun. Guard towers loomed, manned by soldiers with rifles slung casually over their shoulders, but the air carried no scent of fear or malice. Trucks rumbled along dirt roads, kicking up dust, and from somewhere nearby came the lowing of cattle, the cluck of chickens, a sound so ordinary, so peaceful, that it jarred against the chaos they had left behind. The prisoners exchanged wary glances, their boots crunching on the gravel as they formed ragged lines. Some kept their chins high, maintaining the rigid posture of the German military, while others slumped, too weary to pretend strength. The guards shouted orders in English, sharp and authoritative, but not laced with hatred. Interpreters, some of them German-speaking Americans of immigrant stock, translated quickly. Line up, move forward, no talking. The tone was businesslike, almost indifferent, as if herding prisoners was just another chore on a long day. Red Cross observers stood off to the side, their white armbands stark against their suits, notebooks in hand, watching every move. That sight alone sent a ripple of confusion through the ranks. Back in Germany, the propaganda films had painted America as a lawless land, where treaties were scraps of paper and humanity a weakness. Yet here were neutral inspectors, ensuring that the Geneva Convention was upheld, as if rules mattered even in the heart of the enemy's territory. One prisoner, a young sergeant from Berlin, with a scar across his cheek from El Alamein, muttered to the man beside him, "This must be a show. They'll reveal their true faces soon enough." His companion, an older corporal from Bavaria, nodded grimly, his eyes scanning the horizon for signs of the trap he was certain lay ahead. The intake process began with an efficiency that bordered on the mechanical, but it carried shocks in its routine kindness. The men were marched into a large tent where they were stripped of their tattered uniforms, deloused with powders that stung their skin but rid them of the lice that had plagued them for months. Their clothes were burned in a pit, the smoke rising thick and acrid, erasing the last remnants of their battlefield lives. Medical examinations followed, doctors in white coats prodding at wounds, checking for fever, listening to lungs ravaged by desert dust, a soldier with a festering bullet wound in his leg expected to be left to rot, perhaps even mocked for his weakness. Instead, an American medic cleaned the injury with antiseptic, stitched it neatly, and bandaged it with fresh gauze. The German sat there, stunned, his mind racing to reconcile this care with the image of the brutal Yankee he had been taught to hate. "Why heal us?" he whispered to no one, his voice barely audible over the hum of activity. "We are your enemies." Another prisoner, overhearing, shook his head. "It's a ploy, to make us grateful, to break our will without a fight. But as the hours wore on, the fear began to mingle with something else, a creeping doubt that gnawed at their certainties. After the checks, they were issued new clothes, simple khaki uniforms stamped with PW in bold black letters. Prisoner of war. The fabric was sturdy, the fit loose but comfortable, a far cry from the rags they had worn. They were marched to the barracks, long wooden structures with tin roofs that baked under the sun. Inside, bunks lined the walls, each with a thin mattress, a pillow, and wool blankets folded neatly at the foot. Stoves stood in the corners, ready to ward off the chill of Texas nights, and windows let in the light, casting patterns on the floor. It was not luxury, not by any means, but it was shelter, clean and orderly, nothing like the dungeons they had imagined. Some men tested the bunks gingerly, as if expecting them to collapse under their weight, while others stood rigid, refusing to acknowledge the comfort. The camp itself unfolded before them like a small town trapped behind wire. There were recreation areas with benches, a library stocked with books in German, even a canteen where they could buy sundries with scrip earned from labor. Guards patrolled, but they did not loom with menace. They walked with the casual stride of men doing a job, not waging a personal vendetta. One prisoner, spotting a guard helping an elderly POW steady himself on the uneven ground, felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "They act as if we are guests," he said softly to his bunkmate, "not captives." The reply came with a snort. "Guests in a cage, remember that?" Yet as the first day drew to a close and the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of orange and red, the men lay on their bunks, the weight of the blankets a strange comfort against their skin. Suspicion still burned bright, a fire fed by years of propaganda, but beneath it flickered the first sparks of wonder. This was not the hell they had braced for. This was something else, something that challenged the very foundations of what they believed about the war, about their enemy, about themselves. But the real test, the moment that would crack their resolve, was not in the barracks or the routines. It waited in the fields beyond the wire, where American farmers would show them a world of plenty that no amount of Nazi rhetoric could have prepared them for. The next morning dawned bright and unforgiving, the Texas sun already climbing high as the bugle call pierced the air. The sound was military, precise, echoing the reveille they had known in their own camps across Europe and Africa. For a brief moment, some of the prisoners forgot their circumstances, muscle memory pulling them from sleep with the discipline of soldiers. But then the reality crashed back. The barbed wire outside the windows, the English commands filtering through the doors, the knowledge that they were no longer fighting for the Reich, but surviving under its conquerors. They formed up in the yard, the dry earth crunching under their boots as roll call began. Names were called in accented German, and each man responded with a curt, "Here," his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. After that came the briefings, Red Cross representatives addressing them through interpreters, explaining the rules of the camp, their rights under the Geneva Convention. "You will be fed, housed, and protected," the interpreter said. His words met with skeptical stares. "You will work, but not in ways that aid the war effort directly. Inspections will ensure compliance." The prisoners listened, arms crossed, faces impassive. One veteran from the Eastern Front leaned toward his neighbor and whispered, "Rights? In war? This is nonsense. They mock us with these fairy tales." His companion nodded, but his eyes darted to the observers, noting how seriously they took their notes. Could it be that these Americans, these supposed degenerates, actually bound themselves to such ideals? The thought was unsettling, a crack in the armor of their worldview. Medical follow-ups came next, more detailed than the day before. Doctors weighed them, noting the undernourishment from months of rationed supplies in the field. Vitamins were distributed, small pills that the men eyed suspiciously before swallowing. No one jeered at their thin frames. Instead, there was a quiet efficiency, as if healing the enemy was just part of the protocol. By midday, work assignments were handed out. Some would maintain the campgrounds, others assist in the kitchens, but a large group was selected for farm labor, bussed out under guard to nearby ranches and fields. The prisoners boarded the trucks, the engines rumbling as they left the wire behind. The landscape unfolded around them, vast and open, nothing like the crowded hills of Germany or the arid wastes of Tunisia. Fields of cotton stretched to the horizon, dotted with workers and machinery. Cattle grazed in pastures, fat and content, their hides gleaming in the sun. The sight alone stirred something in the men, a mix of awe and resentment. Back home, farms struggled under wartime shortages. animals requisitioned for the front, fields bombed or left fallow. Here, it seemed, the land gave endlessly. They arrived at a sprawling farm, the air thick with the scent of turned earth and hay. The farmer, a weathered man in overalls and a wide-brimmed hat, greeted the guards with a nod, his eyes flicking over the prisoners without hatred, just appraisal. "Need 'em for harvest," he said simply, his Texas drawl thick. The interpreter translated the assignments, picking crops, loading wagons, tending to livestock. The work was hard under the sun, sweat soaking their uniforms, but it was not the back-breaking slavery they had feared. Breaks were given, water passed around in canteens, and then came lunch. The farmer's wife and daughters appeared with baskets, spreading out cloths on the ground in the shade of a large oak. The prisoners were called over, hesitant, their stomachs growling despite themselves. In the trenches, meals had been sparse, hard bread, ersatz coffee, perhaps a tin of meat if supplies held. Hunger was a constant shadow, sharpening their edges, fueling their desperation. But here, as they approached, the baskets revealed a spread that made their mouths water involuntarily. Fresh bread, still warm from the oven, slathered with butter, slices of ham, thick and pink, piled high, corn on the cob, dripping with juice, apples red and crisp from the orchard nearby, and pitchers of milk, cold and creamy, poured from the farm's own cows. The Germans stood there, trays in hand, staring as the women ladled portions onto their plates without a word of scorn. One prisoner, a former farmhand from Saxony, watched as the farmer himself carved the ham, his knife flashing in the light. The portions were generous, heaping, as if feeding these men was no different from feeding his own kin. The man's hands trembled as he accepted his plate, the weight of the food a shock after so long with so little. They sat in the grass, the guards nearby but not hovering, and began to eat. The first bite of bread was soft, melting on the tongue, the butter rich and salty. The ham followed, juicy and flavorful, a taste they had almost forgotten. Milk washed it down, cool and nourishing, filling the emptiness in their bellies. Whispers started among them, low and disbelieving. "This can't be real," one said, his voice choked. "They feed us like kings." Another, tears welling unbidden in his eyes, nodded. "Look at the farmer. He gives without question. Back home my family scrapes for crusts. Back home my family scrapes for crusts." The farmer, noticing their stares, simply shrugged and said through the interpreter, "A man's gotta eat to work. No sense in starving good help." But for the prisoners, it was more than food. It was a confrontation with abundance, with a land untouched by the war's ravages, where farmers could afford to share without fear of tomorrow's shortages. One man, overcome, set his plate down and covered his face, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Others followed, the tears coming not from weakness, but from the shattering of illusions. They had fought believing in scarcity, in the superiority of their struggle, but here, watching the American farmer feed them as equals, the truth pierced deeper than any bullet. The camp routines deepened this revelation in the days that followed. Each meal a reminder of what they had lost, each act of normalcy a blow to their pride. Back at Camp Hearne after that first farm day, the mess hall became another arena of astonishment. Dinner that evening was no less generous. Steak grilled over open flames, potatoes baked with cheese, vegetables fresh from the fields. The prisoners lined up, trays clattering, the steam rising thick with aromas that tugged at memories of peacetime feasts. Coca-Cola bottles were handed out, the fizzing sweetness a novelty that some sipped tentatively, others gulped down with relish. Laughter broke out sporadically, nervous at first, then genuine, as the carbonation tickled their throats. But beneath the mirth lay a current of unease. "They eat like this every day?" one prisoner asked, his fork paused midair. "While our cities ration everything?" The answer hung unspoken. Yes, and it exposed the lies they had been fed about America's weakness. Nights in the barracks brought reflection. Men lying awake under the blankets, the sounds of crickets outside mingling with snores and whispers. Conversations turned to home, to letters that spoke of bombings, of loved ones going hungry. The contrast gnawed at them, breeding guilt. "We live better here than our own people," a lieutenant confessed in the dark. "What does that say about our cause?" Arguments erupted, voices rising until guards intervened. Some clung to faith in the Führer, insisting victory was near, that this plenty was a sign of decadence that would lead to America's fall. Others, voices softer, began to doubt. English classes offered in the evenings drew a few, the words hello, thank you, food rolling off tongues accustomed to commands in German. Books from the library, Classics like Goethe, alongside American novels, provided escape but also insight into a culture they had been taught to despise. Sports fields saw impromptu soccer games, the prisoners kicking a ball with guards, sometimes joining in, the competition fierce but fair. One such game ended with handshakes, a moment that left participants uneasy, as if crossing an invisible line. Work on the farms continued, each day bringing new sights of American plenty. Tractors plowed fields with ease, silos overflowed with grain, livestock numbered in the hundreds. The farmers treated them as laborers, not enemies, offering water, shade, even conversation through interpreters. "How's the harvest back in Germany?" one asked innocently, unaware of the pain his question stirred. The prisoner replied haltingly, "Not like this, not anymore." Meals in the fields persisted, picnics of sandwiches, fruits, pies baked with sugar that seemed limitless. Watching the farmers' families join sometimes, children laughing as they passed plates, brought more tears. "They share with us," a prisoner murmured, "as if we deserve it." The crying became a quiet ritual for some, hidden behind hands or turned away. But it marked a turning point, no longer just from shock, but from a dawning realization that the enemy was human, capable of generosity that their own leaders had denied them. Yet loyalty lingered, a thorn in their sides. Propaganda echoes warned against softening, against betraying the Reich by accepting this life. Some prisoners isolated themselves, refusing extra food, punishing their bodies to maintain purity. Others embraced it, rationalizing that survival was duty. Red Cross visits reinforced the rules, inspectors asking if treatment was fair. Most said yes, the truth bitter on their tongues. In the barracks, shame followed. "We praise our captors while our brothers fight," one accused. The debates raged, dividing the men into factions, the steadfast, the wavering, the broken. Culture clashes added layers. American music drifting from radios, jazz rhythms alien and seductive, drawing curious listeners. Holidays brought surprises. Thanksgiving with turkey and stuffing, a feast that overwhelmed. "This is how they celebrate?" a prisoner asked, plate piled high, with such waste? But it was gratitude, not waste, that the Americans embodied, a concept foreign to their war-torn minds. Personal stories emerged in quiet moments, a guard sharing tales of his farm back in Iowa, prisoners recounting villages in the Rhineland. Bonds formed tentatively, photographs exchanged, faces of wives and children bridging the divide. One guard, seeing a prisoner's drawing of home, offered paper and pencils. The act, small but kind, elicited more tears. "Why do this?" the prisoner asked. The guard shrugged. "You're a man, like me." Such simplicity cut deep. As months passed, the contradictions mounted, the plenty of America contrasting the scarcity of war reports from home. Rumors of D-Day, of advances in Normandy, filtered in, heightening anxiety. "Our time here is borrowed," a prisoner said. "What awaits when we return?" The answer loomed, uncertain, but the lessons of Camp Hearne embedded themselves. Humanity persisted, even in enmity. The day they cried watching farmers feed them was not isolated. It echoed in every meal, every gesture, reshaping their worlds.